Hello and welcome. This is Professor Q. Today's video will focus on a little-known fact that in early America, thousands of poor white children were mistreated in similar ways to that of black slave children. Perhaps as we move through this video, you will see some of the similarities. I am by no means saying that life for white children was as difficult and threatening on all counts, but there were many painful issues suffered by both. Why would whites in positions of authority treat white children in such a deplorable manner, and exactly who benefited? Okay, let's get started. I have included actual photos so you can get a close-up picture of the horror children went through on the orphan trains. There is also a flyer notifying people of the dates the train would be in certain Midwest areas. Adults were informed they could simply pick out children to take home. In early America, thousands upon thousands of people made the journey to the new land in search of a better life. Yes, good old America was the promised land, but little did they know how hard and life-threatening their new world would be, and for many, the journey ended in death. In fact, most found themselves living a much harsher life than what they had left behind. In fact, many had to make life or death family decisions, which were heartbreaking. Many also wished to return to their original homeland, but did not have the money for the return voyage. They were literally stuck in a new land to survive as best they could. In the beginning, most settled in East Coast areas such as New York. Many fewer chose to make the difficult journey to the rural Midwest, where they could establish farms. This also turned out to be a very, very hard life. The land was not made ready to welcome newcomers. As more people arrived in America, cities began experiencing severe overcrowding. Also, no one regulated immigration, and diseases began spreading at an alarming rate. There began to be more and more homeless children, as many lost their parents, and others were actually put out of their homes to survive the best way they could on the streets. A lucky few were taken in by other family members or neighbors. However, this was another problem for children, as they were often forced to go to work to help support the family that took them in. Some of these children were as young as 6 years old. There were no active agencies or programs to help children, and most families in the community refused to take these children into their own homes. Many families were barely providing for themselves and couldn't take the additional burden of feeding and raising someone else's children. That forced more children to become homeless and live on the streets. It was common to join gangs because it added at least a little protection. They committed small petty crimes, such as stealing to eat. There has been no documentation that these kids committed violent crimes or crimes against people. As you can see from the photos of children living on the streets, they had a truly life and death struggle each day. As of date, I have not found statistics of how many died or disappeared. Just like today, I'm positive that many children who disappeared had not left to relocate to another town or city, but rather met horrible ends. No accurate records were maintained, so there is no way of estimating how many were lost. Some managed to get a job, but with no child labor laws, several got hurt, maimed, or killed in accidents. They were very, very often taken advantage of because they could not defend themselves. It's horrible to think how they survived in New York's freezing winters and stifling summers. When a child was arrested for committing even minor crimes, they were actually placed in jail cells with adult, often hardened criminals. Some of these children were as young as 5 years old. We can only imagine how these young kids were taken advantage of and abused. They could not defend themselves. All residents living in these communities had to provide everything they needed without outside help. Believe it or not, this was closely monitored and enforced. You could not go next door to borrow sugar or milk. There were cases when families had to move out of their town or city if they could not show their ability to exist on their own. It was not unheard of for families to be escorted to the town limits and told not to return. Everyone simply had to provide for themselves. When the number of homeless children grew to an amazing 30,000 in New York alone, the more powerful residents became overwhelmed and at a loss of what to do. In 1853, a Protestant minister named Charles Brace presented the idea of putting children on what he called orphan trains. They would be transported to rural areas with specific stops all along the way. St. Louis, Chicago, and Cleveland were among those stops. Now it needs to be very clear that there was another reason for the children to be transported. Influential residents did not like the look of their towns or cities, with homeless children roaming around. Therefore, sending these children to the Midwest prairie areas would eliminate the homeless problem. It was decided that people would meet the train at specific stops, choose whatever children or child they wanted, and take them home right then and there. No one had background or criminal checks or in-depth interviews. If someone only wanted one child, family members or friends would be separated. It stands to reason that most never saw each other again because they had no idea where each other had been taken. They had no way of knowing when or where children would be chosen and taken off the train. Many must have suffered emotionally and mentally when taken to farms with people they had never seen before. The children had only known city life, whereas these farms were being newly settled and were very isolated. Think of all those cowboy movies we have seen over the years. Newly settled meant little to nothing around and was often referred to as the prairie because that's all you could see. No schools, stores, neighbors, or children to associate and play with. They experienced long hours of hard, laboring work. There were no child labor laws as we have today. People worked children long and hard because there was nothing in place, making it illegal. How shocking would this whole new way of life be for a city boy or girl? Children had only been told they were going out west. What did that even mean to a child who did not understand the concept? These kids had no one to turn to for support or aid. Did anyone put anything in place to guarantee their safety? Let's look at those and other issues in the following part 2. This is the end of part 1. This is Professor Q. Please join me for the final video.